The laughter stopped the moment her fist moved. Happened next left even the black belt trembling in silence. In a crowded gym filled with roaring energy, a black belt fighter thought it would be funny to challenge a quiet black woman, assuming she was fragile, out of place, and powerless. No one expected what followed. What began as a joke turned into a lesson the entire gym would never forget, as she revealed a side of herself that no one had seen before. The gym was buzzing with noise, the sound of gloves hitting bags, trainers shouting encouragement, and the heavy thud of feet against mats. Every corner vibrated with energy, the kind that builds when ambition, sweat, and competition collide. It was an ordinary evening, yet something was about to happen that no one would ever forget. The room smelled of leather and chalk, the sharp scent of determination lingering in the air, while echoes of laughter and chatter bounced off the walls, lined with mirrors and banners. Fighters of all levels moved across the floor, sparring, stretching, testing their endurance, while the trainers kept a close eye on every movement. At the center of this noise stood a black belt, confident, strong, known by everyone. His presence always attracted attention, not just because of his skill, but because of his ego that carried itself into every gesture, every smirk, every word. He thrived on admiration, the kind that comes from being the best in the room. That night, his eyes fell on someone who didn't fit the usual mold. A quiet black woman, standing near the sidelines, simply watching. She wasn't dressed like a fighter. She wasn't laughing with the others. She wasn't seeking attention. She stood with her arms loosely folded, her posture calm, her gaze steady, as if she were there for something beyond the spectacle. The black belt called her forward. His voice cut through the noise, bold, commanding, dripping with mockery. "Come on," he said, smirking. "Let's see what you've got." At first, there was confusion. People looked at one another, surprised by his choice. She didn't look like someone who belonged on the mat. Then came the laughter. It rolled through the gym like a wave, feeding on itself. The idea of her fighting a black belt was comedy to them, entertainment. They whispered to one another, doubting she even knew how to throw a punch, let alone survive in the ring. To them, she was just an outsider spectator about to be humiliated. She didn't argue. She didn't refuse. She simply stepped forward, her movements measured and quiet. She didn't glance around for approval. She didn't flinch at the laughter. Her silence was unsettling, her calmness sharper than any insult. For a moment, the noise seemed to press harder against her, the weight of ridicule heavy in the air, but she carried it with ease, as though it had no place in her world. Her eyes were calm but sharp, like a blade sheathed in velvet, waiting. The black belt smirked wider, already savoring the moment. He bowed carelessly, mocking the traditions of respect, and took his stance with exaggerated confidence. Around them, the crowd leaned in, eager for the show. Some even pulled out their phones, ready to capture the spectacle, certain this would end quickly and comically. She stood opposite him, unmoving. And then, slowly, she lifted her arms into a stance precise, balanced, controlled. It was subtle, but anyone who had real eyes for fighting could see it immediately. Her form wasn't clumsy. It wasn't the posture of someone stepping onto a mat for the first time. It was exact. Every angle, every line of her body spoke of discipline. It was the kind of stance carved into muscle through years of repetition. But the laughter drowned that truth, and no one saw it except the black belt himself, who, for the first time, felt a flicker of unease. The silence before the storm stretched out. The air seemed to shift, as though something unseen had entered the room. She didn't speak, didn't smile. Her eyes locked onto him with a quiet intensity that unsettled his arrogance. Still, he shrugged it off, bouncing lightly on his feet, tapping at the mat, confident that whatever skill she thought she had, it would crumble against his experience. The trainer gave the signal, and the fight began. He lunged forward quickly, throwing a light jab meant to tease, not to strike hard. But she didn't flinch. Her head tilted just slightly, her body moving with the ease of water, and the punch cut through empty space. Before he could process, her counter came swift, controlled, striking his arm in a way that snapped his balance. The gym gasped. It wasn't flashy, It wasn't brutal, but it was perfect. He stumbled back, surprised. The laughter dimmed, replaced by murmurs of confusion. He reset, brushing it off, his smirk returning, though thinner now, strained. He stepped in again, faster this time, adding power, throwing combinations. Yet every strike met with nothing. She was there, and then gone, moving like smoke, her feet silent, her eyes reading his every motion before it even fully formed. With each miss, his frustration grew, and with each counter, the crowd's laughter faded into silence. Her movements weren't loud or boastful. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Every motion was precise, a quiet reminder that strength doesn't always shout. Wait, it studies, it strikes when the time is right. The black belt grew reckless. His pride couldn't stand the mounting humiliation. He pressed harder, throwing his weight into every punch, every kick, determined to crush the quiet storm in front of him. But the more he pushed, the more exposed he became. And then it happened. She moved with lightning speed, her body cutting through the air with a fluidity that seemed impossible. In one smooth motion, she slipped past his guard and delivered a strike so sharp, so perfectly placed, that the sound of it echoed through the gym like a crack of thunder. His body faltered, knees buckling, the air knocked out of him. The gym froze. Every voice died. Every smirk vanished. Phones lowered slowly. Eyes widened. The black belt dropped to the mat, gasping for breath, staring up at the woman he had mocked, the woman no one believed in. And she simply stood there, her breathing steady, her eyes calm, her stance unbroken. She didn't raise her arms in victory. She didn't shout. She didn't even look around for validation. Her silence was louder than any cheer, her stillness more powerful than any celebration. For a long moment, the gym was wrapped in stunned silence. Then whispers began. Soft at first, then louder. Respect replaced ridicule. All replaced laughter. What had begun as a cruel joke had transformed into a lesson no one in that room would ever forget. Because in that moment, she didn't just defeat a black belt. She shattered every assumption, every stereotype, every careless judgment. She reminded everyone that true strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it does, it silences the world.
She stepped onto the mat without a word. The black belt smirked, bowing casually, still certain of his control. But the moment she raised her stance, everything shifted. Her movements were precise, disciplined, and dangerous. In her eyes there was no hesitation, only years of unspoken training and a quiet storm that was about to be unleashed. The gym's noise, the laughter, the mocking comments, all of it seemed to blur into the background, replaced by an invisible tension that hung in the air. The smirk on his face faltered for the briefest second, though he tried to mask it. He had been in countless sparring matches before, had faced skilled opponents, had dominated beginners. But something in the way she stood, in the way she carried her weight, whispered to him that this would not be the joke he had imagined. The trainers, who had been leaning back casually, now shifted forward with interest. A few fighters who were busy with their own drills paused mid-combination, their eyes narrowing as they studied her form. They didn't speak, but their silence was louder than the laughter that had filled the room only moments earlier. She wasn't standing like a novice. Her heels weren't flat. Her guard wasn't loose. Her focus wasn't scattered. Every detail screamed discipline. The black belt bounced lightly on his toes, trying to shake off the unease. He told himself it was nothing, that whatever skill she had, it would crumble under his pressure. He had beaten men twice her size, competitors with years of experience. This was just a woman who had wandered too far into the wrong place, nothing more. He lunged forward with a testing jab, light and playful, meant to feel her out. She didn't flinch. Instead, she slipped her head just slightly to the side, letting his fist pass inches from her face, her eyes never leaving his. The movement was so clean, so instinctive, that he felt a strange chill run down his spine. Before he could pull back fully, her hand snapped out, not to strike hard, but to touch his wrist with a precise redirection that sent his balance just slightly off. It was subtle, but to anyone watching closely it was a statement. She wasn't guessing, she wasn't surviving, she was in control. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of the laughter died away. Phones that had been raised to capture comedy now recorded something else entirely. The black belt recovered quickly, masking his surprise with a grin. He circled her, throwing a few more jabs, sharper now, testing her defense. Each time, she slipped just outside his reach, conserving her energy, her body moving like water, flowing around his attacks with an ease that made his strikes look clumsy. His grin tightened. He pushed harder, throwing a low kick, expecting her to stumble. She didn't. She stepped just enough to absorb the motion, her leg checking his strike with perfect timing. The sound echoed across the mat, sharp and controlled. The room was quieter now. Those who had been laughing were silent, eyes wide, realizing slowly that this wasn't a game. The trainers exchanged looks, whispering under their breath. Someone muttered, "She knows what she's doing." Another added, "That's not beginner's form." The black belt heard those whispers, and they stung more than her counters. His pride flared. He was the black belt. This was his gym, his domain. He couldn't let the tide shift. He lunged forward with a combination jab cross hook, followed by a kick, his strikes faster, heavier, each one meant to overwhelm. She moved with frightening precision. Every punch missed its mark by a hair, every kick redirected by the slightest shift. She wasn't wasting energy, wasn't flailing. She was waiting. And then, she struck. Her counter came like lightning. A step inside his guard, a palm strike aimed at his chest, not brutal but perfectly placed. The impact echoed, and he staggered backward, breath stolen from his lungs. The gym gasped. For the first time, his smirk was gone, replaced by shock. He stared at her, chest rising and falling, eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't just blocked, she hadn't just survived. She had hit him cleanly, decisively, and without hesitation. The whispers grew louder. Fighters leaned closer, trainers frowned with intrigue. No one dared laugh now. The black belt's ego screamed at him to reassert control. He straightened, forcing a smile, but it looked hollow. He clapped his hands together, bouncing again, pretending to be relaxed. "All right," he muttered under his breath, though she gave no sign of hearing. Her eyes were locked on him, unwavering, calm yet piercing. He launched again, this time with fury. His strikes grew wild, faster, more reckless, his body twisting with power meant to intimidate, to crush. She met him with silence, with balance, with discipline. Her breathing stayed even, her eyes sharp, her body untouchable. Each of his attacks met with air, or her guard, or her redirection. The more he threw, the more desperate he became. Sweat poured down his face, his strikes growing sloppier, his frustration mounting. And then, when his guard was open, she struck again. This time, it was a low sweep, perfectly timed, catching him off balance. His feet flew from under him, and he hit the mat with a thud that silenced the room completely. For a moment, no one moved. The black belt, the man who had mocked her, who had called her forward as a joke, was on the ground, staring up in disbelief. She stood over him, not gloating, not smiling, simply steady, her breathing calm, her stance unbroken. The silence in the gym was deafening. The trainers stared. The fighters froze. Even the ones holding their phones lowered them slowly, realizing they weren't capturing a joke but a lesson. The black belt scrambled to his feet, his pride refusing to let the moment end there. He shook his head, forcing a laugh, pretending it was nothing, but his eyes betrayed him. There was no confidence left, only desperation. He attacked again, more wildly than before, trying to reclaim his dignity, but every movement betrayed him. He was no longer the composed master of the gym. He was chasing a storm he couldn't catch. She read him like an open book, her counters sharp, her timing flawless. And then, the final blow came. She moved with a speed that blurred, stepping inside his strike, delivering a precise spinning back kick that landed squarely against his midsection. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. His body folded, air rushing from his lungs, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping, clutching his chest. The gym erupted not with cheers, not with laughter, but with silence, the kind of silence that carries awe, respect, and disbelief all at once. The black belt knelt on the mat, broken not just in body but in pride, while she stood tall, unshaken, calm as ever. She didn't raise her hands in victory. She didn't demand recognition. She simply lowered her stance, bowed with quiet respect, and stepped back, leaving the room frozen in her wake. For long moments, no one spoke. Eyes followed her as she walked toward the edge of the mat, her presence commanding even in silence. The trainers exchanged stunned glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to admiration. The fighters whispered to one another, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding slowly as the truth settled in. They had all seen something extraordinary. The black belt remained on his knees, staring at the mat, his pride shattered. He had thought this was a joke. He had thought he would humiliate her. Instead, he had been humbled in front of everyone he had hoped to impress, and she had done it without arrogance, without cruelty, without a single unnecessary word. Her strength had spoken for itself, louder than any boast could have. The story of that night would spread far beyond the walls of that gym. People would whisper about the woman who silenced a black belt, who walked into a room full of doubters and walked out leaving respect in her wake. They would talk not just about her skill, but about her presence, the quiet storm that had shifted the air, the calm that had broken arrogance, the silence that had roared louder than laughter, because, in the end, it wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson, a reminder that appearances deceive, that strength often hides in unexpected places, that respect must be earned, and that underestimating someone can be the greatest mistake of all. And for those who witnessed it, the memory would never fade. The fight began. In seconds, the black belt's smirk vanished as her strikes landed with power and speed that silenced the gym. Every blow told a story of resilience. Every movement carried discipline. When he finally dropped to his knees, gasping, the room was frozen in shock. No one laughed anymore. That day she didn't just win a fight, she earned respect that could never be taken away. The moment his knees hit the mat, the sound echoed louder than the laughter that had filled the air only minutes earlier. It was the sound of pride breaking, the sound of arrogance crumbling in the face of undeniable truth. The black belt, once the center of admiration and confidence, now knelt hunched, his hands gripping his ribs, his breath shallow and uneven. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something to hold on to, perhaps the support of the crowd, perhaps a shred of dignity, but all he found was silence. The same people who had laughed with him now stared in stunned disbelief. Not one voice rose to comfort him, not one face held amusement. She stood a few feet away, her stance unbroken, her breathing calm. Her face showed no pride, no anger, no gloating. It was as if the fight had been nothing more than a conversation, a language she had spoken fluently for years, while the rest of them had only just realized they didn't understand a word. The discipline in her eyes was unshakable, a discipline carved not in a day, not in a month, but in countless hours of training that no one in that room had ever seen. The trainers who had crossed their arms casually at the start now leaned forward, their mouths parted slightly, their brows furrowed with recognition. They had seen skill before, they had seen champions rise and fall, but there was something in the way she moved, in the way she carried herself, that set her apart. It wasn't only physical, it was deeper. Every step, every strike, every block carried a weight of history, of struggle, of battles fought long before this one. The black belt tried to push himself back to his feet, his hands trembling, his body heavy. His pride wouldn't allow him to stay down. The smirk was gone, but the ego inside him clawed desperately for survival. He staggered upright, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his forehead, his eyes narrowing at the woman who had dismantled him with such quiet precision. Again, he muttered under his breath, but his voice cracked, the confidence stripped bare. She didn't move. She simply stood, her gaze fixed on him, not with cruelty but with an almost unsettling calm. For a second, it seemed as though she was looking straight through him, not at the fighter he pretended to be, but at the insecure man behind the belt. That silence weighed heavier on him than any punch she had thrown. He charged again, more desperate now, throwing wild punches that lacked the precision he once prided himself on. Each strike was fueled not by skill but by humiliation, and she read them easily, moving just enough to let his fists slice empty air. The crowd watched in awe as his exhaustion grew, his movements slowing, while she remained unshaken. Then, with a motion so swift it seemed unreal, she delivered a strike that landed squarely against his chest. The force knocked the breath out of him, and he collapsed once again, this time his body refusing to rise. The gym exhaled collectively, as though the entire room had been holding its breath. No one clapped, no one jeered. The silence was heavier now, almost reverent. She lowered her stance and stepped back, bowing lightly out of respect. That single gesture carried more power than any victory shout could have. It showed the essence of true disciplined strength without arrogance, victory without cruelty. The crowd felt it. They felt the difference between her and the man who had mocked her only minutes ago. She wasn't there to humiliate. She wasn't there to prove superiority. She was there because strength demanded no explanation. It simply revealed itself when challenged. The black belt remained on his knees, his chest heaving, his head lowered. For the first time in a long while, he couldn't escape the truth. His reputation, his pride, his aura of invincibility all had been stripped away by a woman who had never boasted, never sought attention, and never needed validation. The trainers exchanged glances, some nodding slowly, acknowledging that they had just witnessed something far greater than a sparring match. They had witnessed humility forced upon arrogance, discipline triumphing over ego. As she walked off the mat, the eyes of every person in the gym followed her. There was no applause, no roaring cheers, but the silence itself was a form of respect. People whispered to one another in low tones, disbelief etched into their words. Did you see her stance? She moved like she'd been training her whole life. How did no one know about her? The questions circled, but she didn't stop to answer. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Her actions had spoken louder than any introduction could. For her, this fight wasn't about defeating a black belt. It wasn't about proving herself to a crowd of strangers. It was something far more personal. Every strike she had thrown was backed by years of struggle, by mornings that began before dawn, by nights when exhaustion threatened to break her spirit, but she trained anyway. She had carried the weight of underestimation her whole life. She had seen the dismissive looks, heard the laughter, felt the sting of being judged not by her ability but by her appearance. Tonight, all of that culminated into a storm that could no longer be contained. And though she said nothing, though she walked out of the gym without a word, her presence lingered in that room like an echo. The fighters would remember it the next time they doubted an opponent. The trainers would think of her the next time they assumed someone else's worth before seeing their skill. And the black belt would carry that moment with him for the rest of his life, not as a shame to hide, but as a lesson burned deep into his pride. Because that night, he hadn't just lost a fight, he had lost the illusion of invulnerability, and in its place, it gained a truth he couldn't ignore. Respect is not claimed by mocking others. It is earned through discipline, humility, and strength that speaks without words. She left the gym as quietly as she had entered, her footsteps soft against the floor, her back straight, her eyes forward. No one stopped her, no one dared. The silence parted for her like a path, and in that silence, every heart in the room knew they had witnessed something rare. They hadn't just seen a fight. They had seen resilience take form, discipline reveal itself, and respect be rewritten in real time. And long after the sound of her footsteps faded, the gym remained quiet. Each person still replaying what they had seen, each one knowing they would never forget the night the laughter died and silence taught them. All a lesson they would carry forever.